I'm Lauren, and for as long as I can remember, Christmas was a night for family gatherings, but for me it felt more like a performance. Every year I'd take my seat at the gilded table ready for the same old jokes, the same polished insults, the same reminder that I wasn't enough. They had their scripts, and I had my silence. They thought it meant I had nothing to say, nothing to offer. But what they didn't know was that while they were busy laughing, I was busy taking notes. This isn't just a story about success. It's a story about what happens when you decide to let the truth speak for itself, working 18 hours a day yet still poor, my brother said, his voice slicing through the laughter like a blade. It was Christmas Eve, but the only thing warm at that table was the food. My father chuckled, swirling his wine. You'll never have enough to eat, Lauren. Some people just don't have the head for success. Their laughter rolled around the table, rehearsed and polished like they'd practiced it for years. I smiled anyway. That's the part they didn't understand, that silence could be sharper than any insult. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. Because one day they'd see exactly what 18-hour days could buy. The Brooks family dinners had always been performances more than gatherings. The house sparkled gold cutlery, fine china, crystal glasses aligned like soldiers. My mother believed in appearances the way priests believed in scripture. A proper dinner shows gratitude, she used to say, though it felt more like a sermon on hierarchy. Gratitude for what I never asked. Maybe for being allowed a seat at their table. Ethan, my older brother, sat at the head even when Dad was present. He was the heir, tall, handsome, Harvard-educated, a golden son dipped in arrogance. I was the afterthought. The daughter who tried too hard, but never quite made it. I used to think it was my fault that if I just worked longer, studied harder, smiled wider, they'd finally see me. Now I know better. Some people don't see you because it's convenient not to. Ethan carved into the turkey, his cufflinks catching the chandelier light. So, little sister, he said, leaning back. Still chasing that, what do you call it again, virtual art thing? It's called Lumiverse, I said softly, setting my fork down. He grinned, eyes glinting. Right. The make-believe business. Cute. The laughter came again, rippling around the table like a wave I'd long since learned to brace for. Dad joined in, even the conductor. Ethan's firm just closed another deal, he said, raising his glass. 9 figures. You could learn something from your brother Lauren. Real work pays off. I wanted to ask him if real work meant networking over golf and drinking whiskey with men who never lifted more than a pen. But I didn't. I just smiled, the same polite, polished smile that had become my armor. The cranberry sauce gleamed dark red against the white porcelain. I dragged my fork through it, slowly drawing thin crimson lines like brushstrokes. 18 hours a day, Ethan repeated, feigning pity. Still poor. Maybe you should just marry someone successful instead of pretending to be. Ethan, Mom chided gently, though her tone was closer to amusement than scolding. Don't tease her. She's creative. Creative. That word. It sounded like an apology wrapped in a compliment. I caught my reflection in the silver platter, composed, still eyes calm. They thought I was quiet because I had nothing to say. But in truth, I was collecting their words, stacking them like evidence. Every insult, every laugh, every little cut that told me I didn't belong. I was storing them for later. Across the table, Aunt Grace adjusted her pearls and offered one of her sugar-coated observations. At least she's trying, she said with a sympathetic smile. That's what matters, isn't it? Effort doesn't feed you, Dad replied smoothly. Results do, Ethan smirked. Yeah, try the results next time, Lauren. The conversation shifted, but the weight of their words lingered like perfume. I tuned out their boasting, the promotions, the new vacation homes, the imported cars. It was the same script every year. They flaunted. I endured. But something inside me was different this time. The laughter didn't sting anymore. It simply echoed. Hollow. Predictable. My cousin Rachel, back from grad school in California, watched the exchange quietly. She hadn't grown up around this kind of venom disguised as family pride. When the room fell into one of those self-satisfied silences, she spoke up. Maybe success isn't just about money, she said softly. The table went still. Ethan barked a laugh. That's exactly what broke people say. Dad nodded in agreement, pleased with the neatness of the put-down. Philosophy doesn't pay bills, sweetheart. Rachel flushed, embarrassed. I didn't mean, it's fine, I interrupted gently. They're right. Bills don't pay themselves. For a fleeting moment, Ethan's grin faltered. He'd expected me to flinch, to retreat into my usual quiet. Instead, I met his gaze head-on, my voice steady. I'm just listening, I said. He raised a brow, listening for what I smiled. For who'll still be laughing in a few years? A hush spread across the table. Dad cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Lauren, no one's laughing at you. We just want you to be realistic. Realistic. That word again. It was their polite way of saying small things. Be realistic, Lauren. Stay ordinary. Don't embarrass us with your dreams. I looked down at my plate and saw something else reflected back, not the defeated daughter they expected, but someone waiting, calculating. Dessert came and went. The conversation floated back to Ethan's firm, to his new house in Austin, to everything that confirmed the hierarchy they loved. I excused myself quietly, slipping out into the cold night air. The snow crunched under my boots, the world outside still and clean, untouched by their words. I stood at the edge of the driveway, breath visible in the freezing air. Through the window, I could still see them, laughing, glasses raised, bathed in gold light. But they didn't realize something crucial sometimes. The one who leaves the table is the only one who's actually full. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen glowed, an unread email from a VC firm I'd pitched months ago. The subject line made my heart pause. Lumaverse prototype. Approved for funding. For a moment, I closed my eyes, letting the snow fall on my face. Then I smiled, not the polite kind, but the quiet, dangerous kind. The kind that says the tables are about to turn. The email came at 2 a.m. I was half asleep on my couch, laptop balanced on my knees, a coffee mug from 3 nights ago sitting cold beside me. When I saw the subject line, funding approved, Lumaverse prototype, I thought it was spam. It wasn't. It was the first time someone other than me believed in what I'd built. I reread it again and again until the words blurred. They'd wired $20,000 for development. It wasn't a fortune. But to me, it was oxygen. That night I didn't sleep. I wrote code until sunrise, my apartment glowing faintly blue from the screen. My fingers trembled over the keyboard, not from exhaustion, but from something like freedom. For the first time, my future didn't depend on their approval, not Dad's, not Ethan's, not anyone's. When morning came, I stood by the window watching the city wake. Delivery trucks rumbled down the street, people hurried to jobs they hated, and I felt something close to defiance pulse through me. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom. Dinner on Sunday. Don't be late again. I smiled without answering. Let them host their dinners. I had my own feast to prepare. My apartment wasn't much, one bedroom, peeling wallpaper, a view of the alley. But to me, it was a laboratory. The coffee table was stacked with sketchbooks filled with concept art, wireframes, and handwritten notes. Immersive environments for human emotion I'd written across the first page months ago. It sounded lofty then. Now it felt like a prophecy. I built Lumaverse from scratch, line by line, using a second-hand computer that froze every time I ran a simulation. When the code crashed, I didn't curse, I recalibrated. Every error message was a riddle, and solving it felt better than any applause. At first, no one cared. I posted early demos on forums, mostly ignored. A few users left comments like cool visuals or needs work. None of them saw what I saw, a world where imagination had no ceiling. Then came Caitlin. She messaged me after watching one of my demo videos. Who built this? It feels alive. I almost laughed the first time anyone described my work as alive. We met over coffee the next day at a tiny cafe near campus. She was a design student, sharp-eyed and impatient with mediocrity. This could be huge, she said, leaning over my laptop. You're not building art. You're building experience. People pay for that. People barely look at it, I told her. They will, she said, once they can't look away. Caitlin became my first collaborator. She brought a visual language to my code light texture motion. We'd work through the night fueled by cheap coffee and cheap ambition. When bugs crashed the system, she'd slap the desk and laugh, saying, "Hey, if it breaks, it means we're pushing it." Weeks passed like minutes. The world outside shrank until all that existed was the glow of our monitors. The first functional build of Lumiverse went live on a rainy Friday. I hit upload heart-pounding and went to sleep convinced no one would notice. By morning, we had thousands of downloads. The buzz started small tech bloggers, indie developers, a few art critics calling it emotion-driven VR. Then one post went viral: 2 women are changing how we feel inside virtual worlds. Our inbox flooded overnight. Partnerships, interviews, offers. I called Caitlin at dawn. "We did it," I whispered. She laughed through the phone. "No, Lauren, we're just getting started." But even as the world began to notice, my family stayed blind. At Sunday dinner, Dad asked Ethan about his firm's new merger, then turned to me out of politeness. "So still working on your little digital thing?" he asked, pouring himself more wine. "It's called Lumiverse," I said, my voice steady. I didn't soften my tone this time. Ethan grinned, eyes glinting. Right. The make-believe business. Cute." I didn't laugh with him. "It's not make-believe. It's a new kind of economy. It's only a matter of time before everyone else figures that out." The laughter that had been rippling around the table came to an abrupt halt. Dad Ever, the conductor, quickly changed the subject. My words had become a small sword sharp enough to silence them. That night after dinner, I sat in my car outside their house, hands gripping the steering wheel, headlights reflecting off the snow. Inside, I could still hear the faint hum of laughter, the same laughter that once hollowed me out. Now it just echoed. I whispered to the windshield, "Keep laughing, Ethan. It buys me time." Back in the apartment, Caitlin called again. "You'll never believe this," she said, her voice shaking with excitement. "A venture group in Seattle wants a demo presentation. They said your prototype has unprecedented commercial potential." I sank onto the couch, heart pounding. "How soon next week? They'll fly us out." "Next week," I repeated, staring at the cracked ceiling above me. The paint was peeling, but all I could see was the sky. For the first time in years, I felt light. The kind of light that comes not from being saved, but from saving yourself. Before bed, I opened my journal, the same one where I'd written all my rejections, all the words my family had thrown at me. At the bottom of the last page, I added a new line. "They laughed at the wrong person." I closed the book and turned off the lights. Outside, the city pulsed like circuitry alive with its own rhythm. Inside, I lay awake, not afraid anymore. The blueprint was set. They'd built their legacy on my silence. Now I was going to build mine loud enough to shake their walls. Seattle was soaked in rain the morning we landed, the kind that seeps into your shoes and spine. Caitlin and I huddled beneath a single umbrella outside the glass tower that housed the investors who could change everything. "Ready?" she asked, teeth chattering. "Not even close," I said. We laughed anyway. The fear didn't go away, but it didn't matter. Fear meant it was real. The conference room was cold and sterile, all glass walls and polished steel. 3 men in tailored suits sat behind a long table, each with a tablet and the same unreadable half-smile. I plugged in my laptop, fingers slightly trembling as I connected the VR headset. The screen flickered, then filled the wall behind me with the glowing title Lumiverse, Experience Emotion. Caitlin nodded at me. I took a breath and began. "Lumiverse isn't a game," I said, voice steadying as I spoke. "It's a living space, a virtual architecture that responds to emotion. When you feel fear, the space trembles. When you feel joy, it blooms." They didn't interrupt, but their expressions barely shifted. One of them, the oldest, leaned forward finally. "And how do you monetize emotion, Miss Brooks?" I smiled faintly. "By helping people build it. We sell environments to therapists, artists, educators, anyone who wants to make connections tangible." He nodded, scribbling something on his tablet. The others remained silent. When the demo began, Caitlin slipped the headset onto the first investor. The screen mirrored his view, a dark void that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. As he exhaled, light rippled through the space colors, blooming from black to deep blue to gold. The room fell silent, the only sound was the hum of the server. 2 minutes later, he removed the headset. His face was unreadable. "It's interesting," he said at last. "But niche. Maybe too abstract for mainstream audiences." Another shrugged. "Pretty but risky." The third smiled politely, already closing his tablet. "We'll be in touch." Caitlin and I packed up in silence. The rain outside hadn't stopped. By the time we reached the street, my hair was plastered to my face. "Well," she muttered. "That went exactly how it was supposed to," I said quietly. She blinked. "You're not upset?" I looked up at the gray sky. They saw light and called it a toy. That's not rejection, that's blindness. We flew back that night, sitting in the last row of the plane. Caitlin fell asleep halfway through the flight. I stared out the window, watching the city lights shrink beneath the clouds. I felt hollow but strangely calm. Failure wasn't new. What was new was how little it scared me now. When we landed, I opened my email. A new message waited. "Loved your presentation. Let's talk." It was from Marianne, a name I didn't recognize. The signature read, "Capital Ventures, Private Investments, New York." I replied immediately, not daring to hope. Within an hour, she wrote back, "Tomorrow noon. My assistant will send the link." The next day, I joined the video call. Marianne appeared on screen, mid-50s, sharp eyes, hair pulled into a silver bun. Behind her was a wall of books and framed patents. "I watched your demo," she said without introduction. "I didn't see a product. I saw philosophy." I hesitated. "Thank you." She smiled slightly. "That's not a compliment. Philosophies don't sell. But sometimes they change things anyway. Tell me what you want, Miss Brooks." I didn't have to think. A chance to build something that lasts. She studied me for a long moment, then leaned forward. "I'll give you $200,000 for 15%. No strings. But I want you to promise me one thing. Don't let the suits decide what beauty looks like." My throat tightened. "You have my word." When the call ended, I just sat there staring at the confirmation email on my screen. Caitlin burst into the apartment minutes later with a bag of cheap champagne. "You're crying," she said, laughing. "Is that a yes cry or a, 'oh God, it's over' cry?" I laughed through tears. "Yes cry. Definitely yes." We celebrated on the apartment floor, glasses clinking against mismatched mugs. For the first time, the word company didn't sound like fiction. Weeks turned into months. With Marianne Capital's funding, we rented a small workspace, a repurposed storage unit that smelled faintly of dust and ambition. Caitlin painted one wall with whiteboard paint, so we could draw and erase endlessly. I bought a second-hand espresso machine that hissed like an old train. We hired one developer, then two. The first real milestone came 6 months later, a fully functioning, immersive gallery. Users could walk through memories, literal visualizations of sound, color, and feeling. We posted the trailer online at midnight. By sunrise, it had 500,000 views. Messages poured in. Therapists wanted to use it for trauma recovery. Schools wanted to teach through emotion-based environments. Investors suddenly wanted meetings. The world was finally catching up to what we already knew. One night, Caitlin looked up from her laptop. "Do you ever think about them, who your family? The ones who called it a hobby." I leaned back, staring at the glowing ceiling. "Every time we hit a new milestone." "Does it make you angry?" I thought for a moment. "Not angry. Just be patient." I didn't tell her I still replayed their laughter sometimes, the way Dad's voice curled around the word poor, the way Ethan's smirk had settled like a scar. I used to want to erase those memories. Now I kept them close. They were fuel. When the first press article came out, Lumaverse raises $2.4 million in seed funding, Caitlin wanted to send it to everyone. I told her not to. "Why not?" she asked. "They should see what you've done." I smiled. "They will. Just not yet." Outside, rain began to fall again, soft against the windows. The glow from the monitors painted the room in pale blue light. I stood there for a long time watching the raindrops slide down the glass, each one catching a fragment of city light before vanishing. Let them think I'm still poor, I whispered to myself. The best stories always start that way. Chapter 4. The Test. The night before the pitch. I didn't sleep. Caitlin stayed in the office, curled up on the couch under her jacket, her laptop still glowing on the coffee table. The city hummed outside our windows, the low electric thrum of traffic and late-night ambition. I sat at my desk, staring at the numbers on the screen. 12 investors, one shot. We'd been invited to the Phoenix Startup Fair, a sprawling convention center filled with booths, banners, and too many people who talked like profit was a religion. Our budget covered a folding table, a vinyl banner printed at a copy shop, and 2 rented VR headsets. Meanwhile, the companies around us had LED walls, branded merch, and espresso machines built into their displays. Caitlin laughed when we arrived. It's like showing up to a sword fight with a paperclip. Good thing we're sharper than they think, I said. We set up our booth under the buzzing fluorescent lights. The banner sagged slightly. One of the headsets kept losing connection. But once the demo started running, it didn't matter. The space came alive, soft lights, swirling colors, breathing in rhythm. A world that felt human. The first investor wandered over, slick hair, perfect smile. He slipped on the headset, glanced around for 30 seconds, and laughed. Pretty, not profitable. He handed it back like it was a child's toy. The next one lasted longer, 45 seconds. He crossed his arms afterward. VR art cute. But no one pays for feelings. Caitlin's jaw tightened. I forced a smile. Thank you for your time. By noon, we'd become invisible. People streamed past without looking. The bigger booths, the ones with neon logos and free lattes, pulled the crowd like gravity. I could see doubt creeping into Caitlin's face. She looked at me like she was trying not to say, maybe they're right. We sat down on the floor behind our booth eating cold sandwiches. Maybe it's too early, she said quietly. Or maybe it's too safe, I replied. She frowned. What does that mean? It means we built something that scares them and people laugh at what they don't understand. I was about to say more when someone cleared their throat. A woman stood there, mid-50s, silver hair in a sleek bob, a small leather bag hanging from her wrist. Her expression wasn't skeptical, it was curious. Is this yours? She asked, pointing to the demo screen. Yes, ma'am, I said, standing quickly. It's called Lumiverse. She nodded once, stepping closer. Show me. Caitlin placed the headset gently over her eyes. The woman moved slowly through the environment, her head tilting slightly as she took it in. Minutes passed. The noise of the convention faded around us. Then she lifted the headset, blinking. How much, she asked. I blinked. Excuse me, I want the full collection, your environments, your architecture, your code. How much? I glanced at Caitlin, who stared back wide-eyed. I said the first number that came to mind, one that felt impossible. 220,000. The woman smiled. Send me the paperwork. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. She extended her hand. Marianne, she said. Call me Marianne. When she walked away, the crowd noise rushed back all at once. Caitlin was still frozen, headset in her hands. You just sold it, she stammered. I guess I did. I said the words barely audible. That night back at the apartment, we celebrated with the same cheap champagne we'd used after our first funding. The cork hit the ceiling, the bubbles spilled onto the floor, and we laughed until our faces hurt. But when Caitlin fell asleep on the couch, I stayed up. I pulled up the contract Marianne had sent over. My name at the bottom looked unreal, like someone else's signature. For years, my family had told me I'd never make enough to eat. Now, one woman's belief had turned my hobby into a company worth fighting for. I opened my phone out of habit, a text from Dad. Family dinner tomorrow. Don't forget to bring dessert. No congratulations, no how's work. Just another reminder that in their world, my life was still a side note. The next day, we wired the contract. Within 24 hours, the funds hit our account. It didn't feel like winning the lottery. It felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. We used the money to move out of the storage unit, and into a small office downtown. Cracked brick walls, creaky floors, sunlight pouring through tall windows. Caitlin brought in plants. I bought real desks. The first time I unlocked the door, the brass handle warm from the sun, I whispered to myself, "This is ours." But even as everything grew, the team, the press, the numbers, I stayed quiet online. No announcements, no posts, no bragging. My family still thought I was freelancing. Poor Lauren, the struggling artist. Let them. At the end of each day, I wrote one sentence in my journal, the one I'd started after that first humiliating dinner. They won't see me coming, because when the world finally did, I wanted the silence before it to be deafening. Outside rain slid down the office windows, blurring the skyline into streaks of silver. Caitlin stood beside me, smiling at the glow of our logo flickering on the screen. "Can you believe this is real?" she whispered. I nodded. "It's real. But it's just the first fire." I didn't tell her that I still carried that dinner in my bones, the laughter, the judgment, the way they had looked at me like failure was my destiny. Every win, every late night, every deal was kindling. And one day soon, that fire would burn bright enough for them to finally see. The office smelled like fresh paint and coffee. For the first time, Lumiverse felt real, not a dream, not a gamble, but something solid, something with weight. Our new sign hung in the window, glowing faintly blue at night. I used to stare at it on my way out, half expecting it to vanish by morning. It didn't. It stayed. By spring, we had contracts with 2 hospitals, 3 schools, and a museum in Chicago. Our environments were being used for trauma therapy art exhibitions, even architectural visualization. I'd gone from designing alone on a dying laptop to leading a team of 12. The headlines came next. VR startup reimagines emotion. The women behind the next digital revolution, Lumiverse raises Series A at $30 million valuation. But I didn't send any of them home. Not one article, not one photo, not one press link. To my family, I was still struggling, still creative, still broke. Sometimes I'd wonder why I kept the act going. Maybe I wanted to see how far the lie could stretch before it snapped. Maybe I wanted to watch them laugh right up until the moment the silence hit. At Sunday dinners, Ethan would brag about his new promotion. Mom would beam at him and Dad would refill his glass like he was toasting royalty. Then, inevitably, the conversation would turn. So Lauren, Dad would say, "Cutting his steak." "Still doing your little design hobby?" I'd smile. "Yes, Dad." "Still doing it? Any real jobs yet?" Ethan would add, smirking. I looked directly at him, my expression unreadable. "I'm busy building my own future, Ethan. It might not look like a real job to you, but it's real enough for me." They paused, the laughter that usually followed my silence never coming. My father's eyes narrowed slightly and my mother's smile faltered. For a moment they looked genuinely confused, as if a rule of their favorite game had just been broken. Back at the office, life was different. There was energy, laughter, the sound of possibility. Caitlin had started calling me boss, even though I hated the word. One afternoon, as we looked over new investor proposals, she said, "You know what's crazy? You're the only person I know who's not excited about success." I looked up. "Who says I'm not? You just hide it better than anyone." "I don't hide it," I said, glancing toward the window. "I just saved it." "For what?" "For when it matters." She didn't push, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes. No one knew how personal this was for me, how deeply I needed them to stay blind. Then came the first gala invitation. A high-profile tech awards dinner downtown. The email said I'd been nominated for Innovator of the Year. I almost deleted it. Public appearances meant exposure, and exposure meant risk. But Caitlin insisted. "You have to go," she said. "You can't keep building an empire in the shadows." "I can try." She laughed. "Not when Forbes keeps calling." I went. Dressed in a black gown I borrowed from a stylist friend, I walked through a crowd of men in tuxedos and women in sequins. The room buzzed with money and ego. A journalist asked how it felt to lead one of the fastest-growing VR companies in the country. I smiled. It feels overdue. They applauded when my name was announced. Cameras flashed, glasses clinked. I gave a speech, short, measured, deliberate. I thanked Caitlin, the team, and the believers who saw beyond the surface. I didn't mention my family. Later that night, I stood alone on the balcony looking out at the city lights. It was strange how success could feel so heavy. Caitlin joined me with 2 glasses of champagne. "We did it," she said. "Yeah," I murmured. "We did." She nudged me. "Then why do you look like you're planning something? Because I am." I didn't elaborate, but she was right. I was planning not another product, not another round of funding, but a reveal. Not yet, but someday. In the months that followed, the company exploded. The press called me a quiet disruptor. Investors called me visionary. Dad still called me unemployed. Once, after another family dinner filled with the usual condescension, I got into my car and sat in silence. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from anger, but from something sharper, the knowledge that their approval meant nothing now. That night I transferred part of my shares into a trust, one designed to fund women-owned startups. I called it the Ember Initiative, a reminder that every flame starts small, often in darkness. Caitlin found out a week later. "You're giving away equity?" she asked. "Not giving away," I said. "Reinvesting. Fire spreads better that way." She stared at me. "You really don't care about the money, do you?" "I care about what it can fix," I said quietly. By summer, the company's valuation crossed $100 million. We hired 40 more people, launched new divisions, and moved into a glass building with our name etched across the front. One afternoon, I stood in the lobby as workers installed the final letter, the glowing E of Lumaverse. My reflection shimmered in the glass doors. I barely recognized her, the woman who used to sleep beside a dying laptop now owned an empire. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "Mom says you missed another dinner. Don't isolate yourself. It's not healthy." I laughed out loud. Isolation, I thought, had been the healthiest choice I'd ever made. But still I replied. Busy building my little hobby. When I looked back up at the glass, the reflection stared back with quiet fire. I adjusted my blazer, smoothed my hair, and whispered to myself, "Keep the mask. They're not ready yet." And for now, that was enough. The day started like any other. I was halfway through reviewing a proposal when Caitlin burst into my office holding her phone like it was on fire. "You need to see this," she said, breathless. On the screen was a headline from Forbes Tech, "The Mystery Behind Lumaverse, Who is Lauren Brooks?" My stomach tightened. It wasn't the first article about the company, but this one was different. It wasn't about us. It was about me. The journalist had pieced together fragments, patent filings, investor documents, a photo from the gala. Nothing confirmed, but close enough to start whispers. Caitlin watched my face. "What do we do?" I closed the laptop gently. "We stay quiet. Always let them wonder before you tell them." But deep down, I knew the silence wouldn't last forever. Over the next few days, the emails multiplied. Reporters, investors, even old classmates wanting quotes. Some congratulated, others probed. I ignored them all. When the first Forbes under 35 nomination came in, I deleted it. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Then one night the phone rang. Not the office line, my personal number, the one only family used. I froze when I saw the name Dad. I hadn't spoken to him in months. I answered slowly. "Hey." His voice was the same deep, smooth tone that once carried authority and now felt like static. "Lauren, your brother told me you missed dinner again." "I've been busy." I'm sure he said, his voice edged with that familiar sarcasm. "Working on that computer hobby of yours?" I smiled faintly. "Something like that." He sighed. "You know, if you just applied that energy to a real job—" "Dad," I interrupted softly, "what do you need?" There was a pause. "We're planning a family dinner next weekend. Your brother's bringing his new boss, a partner from his firm. It'd mean a lot if you came." I almost laughed. Meaning a lot to him, that meant optics. He wanted a full table. The perfect family picture. "Sure," I said. "I'll be there." He sounded surprised. Good. It's time you showed your face again. After I hung up, Caitlin looked up from her desk. Everything okay? I exhaled. Family dinner next weekend. She grinned. Are you going to tell them yet? Not yet? I said, eyes narrowing slightly. Timing is everything. The week blurred by in a haze of meetings and product launches. Our valuation had tripled, our offices expanded to New York, and our employee stock plan was rolling out. The company's name was everywhere except in my family's vocabulary. By Friday, I was ready. The dress, the car, the composure, all chosen carefully. My driver pulled up outside my parents' house just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The old house looked smaller than I remembered, but just as polished. The same white porch, the same wreath, the same illusion of perfection. I stepped inside. The chatter stopped. Lauren, Mom exclaimed, her voice sweet but uncertain. It's been so long, work's been busy, I said simply. Ethan appeared next, his smile sharp as ever. Still working those 18-hour days. It must be exhausting to earn so little. I laughed softly, brushing past him. You'd be surprised. Dinner was a performance. My parents asked polite questions, then answered them for me. Ethan bragged about his firm's latest deal, his new car, his network. I nodded, playing along. Every insult, every jab slid past me like smoke. Then Ethan's boss leaned forward. So Lauren, what do you do exactly? I met his eyes. I build worlds. He chuckled. Ah, a designer. My wife dabbles in that too. Art therapy or something, right? Ethan grinned. No. She does virtual art stuff. Doesn't really pay, but she's passionate. I didn't correct him. Not yet. Then midway through dessert, Ethan's phone buzzed. He checked it, froze. His face shifted from smug to pale in seconds. Something wrong, Dad asked. He didn't answer immediately. His hand trembled slightly as he turned the screen toward me. It was an email. The subject line read, Congratulations, Lauren Brooks, Forbes, Self-Made Billionaires, List 2025. The room went silent. Mom blinked her fork halfway to her mouth. Dad frowned, confused. Ethan looked like he'd swallowed glass. I didn't move. I simply set down my glass, wiped my mouth, and said, Guess the hobby paid off. Dad finally spoke, voice cracking. Lauren, this can't be right. It's right, I said quietly. Every share, every stock, every sleepless night mine. Ethan's boss cleared his throat. You're Lauren Brooks, Lumiverse. I smiled faintly. Guilty. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Mom whispered, Why didn't you tell us? Because you wouldn't have believed me, I said. The silence that followed was thick and electric. All the laughter, all the mockery, all the dismissive smiles from every dinner before collapsed into one perfect, stunned stillness. When I finally stood, I felt taller than I ever had. Thanks for dinner, I said, reaching for my coat. It was satisfying. As I turned toward the door, Ethan muttered under his breath, You lied to us. I looked back. No, I said. I let you assume. Outside, the air was cool and clean. My car waited at the curb. Behind me, I could still hear the murmur of disbelief through the windows' voices trying to rewrite history. But that was their problem now. When I slid into the car, my driver glanced in the mirror. Everything all right, Miss Brooks? I smiled, leaning back. Perfect. As the city lights blurred past, I finally allowed myself a quiet laugh, the kind that came from the bone-deep satisfaction of truth revealed. They'd spent years mocking me for being poor. Now they'd spend the rest of their lives remembering the moment they realized I was richer than all of them combined. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Missed calls, texts, news alerts. My face was everywhere. Forbes, Bloomberg, Tech Insider. Every headline said the same thing: Lauren Brooks, founder of Lumiverse, becomes youngest self-made billionaire in America. I stood by the window of my apartment, still in my robe, the city below glowing gold with sunrise. Caitlin called 3 times before I picked up. Lauren, are you seeing this? You broke the internet. I'm seeing it, I said quietly. She laughed. You sound calm. You should be freaking out. I looked down at the street where life went on, people rushing to work, taxis honking. I already did my freaking out, I said. Now I'm just free. But freedom, I realized, came with a strange silence. I'd waited years for that moment of recognition for the world to finally know. Yet when it came, I didn't feel triumph. I felt released. The kind you only feel when the fight is finally over. The victory I had planned felt hollow, a grand prize of an empty plate. Then my phone buzzed again, this time with a name I hadn't seen in months. Dad. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. His voice was uncertain, stripped of its usual command. Lauren. Hi, Dad. I saw the news. I figured. Long pause. Then, why didn't you tell us? I could hear the clinking of dishes in the background. Mom must have been listening too. Because you never asked, I said. That's not fair, he muttered. No, I replied softly. What wasn't fair was watching you celebrate Ethan's bonuses while you laughed at my rent receipts. The silence stretched. I could almost feel the weight of it pressing through the phone. Then, softer than I expected, he said, We were wrong. It was an apology, the first in my life. And yet it didn't land the way he thought it would. I wasn't angry anymore. The rage had burned away long ago, leaving something sharper, colder clarity. I know, I said. You were. He hesitated. Your mother wants to see you. We'd like to have dinner again. Properly this time. I smiled faintly. Sure, Dad. Dinner sounds great. When I hung up, I looked at my reflection in the window, hair unbrushed, robe, loose, a billionaire with a bedhead. I almost laughed. For years I'd imagined what this day would feel like. I thought it would be fireworks. It wasn't. It was quiet, clean, like air after a storm. Caitlin walked in with 2 coffees. Big day, she said, handing me one. Are you ready for your interview? What interview, Forbes? She said, grinning. They want a video piece, the woman who built Lumiverse. You can't say no this time. I sighed. Fine. One interview. Later that afternoon, I sat under studio lights in our office. The interviewer, a young woman with kind eyes, adjusted her mic and smiled. Lauren, everyone's calling you the face of a new generation of tech entrepreneurs. How does it feel? I thought for a moment. It feels overdue, but also temporary. Recognition fades. Impact doesn't. She nodded, intrigued. What do you mean by impact? I mean building something that outlives applause, I said. Something that gives other women what I never had belief. When the interview ended, Caitlin hugged me. You sounded like a CEO and a philosopher, she said. I laughed. That's my new brand, apparently. But the next message on my phone wiped the smile from my face. It was from Ethan. Family dinner, tomorrow night. Don't be late. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just an order like always. The next evening I arrived in silence. The house looked exactly the same, the manicured lawn, the lights glowing warm through the windows, the same perfection that had once suffocated me. Inside, Mom fussed with the tablecloth. Dad poured wine. Ethan stood near the fireplace, his tie too tight, his smile strained. Lauren, Mom said, moving in for a hug. You look wonderful. Thanks, Mom. Ethan cleared his throat. So, congratulations. Big news. Guess so. Dad sat down, his tone measured. We're proud of you. I raised an eyebrow. For real this time, or just because Forbes said so? He flinched. Mom's smile faltered. The air shifted. Ethan stepped in quickly. Let's not start that. We're all family here. I looked at him. Funny. Family didn't seem to matter when you called me a failure. He opened his mouth to reply, but before he could, his phone buzzed. He glanced down and froze. What Dad asked. Ethan didn't answer. He just turned the screen toward him. It was another Forbes alert, the cover photo, my face on it. The headline blazing, Lauren Brooks, the billionaire who stayed invisible. Dad's jaw tightened. Invisible, I smiled. That's what happens when you stop looking. Ethan tried to laugh, but it came out thin. So, what now? You just sit on top of the world and forget us. I leaned forward slightly. No, I remember everything. The words hung there like smoke. After dinner, I stood to leave. Mom reached for my hand. Lauren, wait. We want to understand, I pulled gently away. You don't need to. You just need to live with it. Outside, the air was cool and clean. My car waited at the curb. Behind me, I could still hear the murmur of disbelief through the window's voices trying to rewrite history. But that was their problem now. When I slid into the car, my driver glanced in the mirror. "Everything all right, Miss Brooks?" I smiled, leaning back. "Perfect." As the city lights blurred past, I finally allowed myself a quiet laugh, the kind that came from the bone-deep satisfaction of truth revealed. They'd spent years mocking me for being poor. Now they'd spend the rest of their lives remembering the moment they realized I was richer than all of them combined. Christmas Eve came wrapped in quiet snow and the smell of pine. The kind of evening my mother always loved to romanticize. But the Brooks house wasn't warm. It glittered too polished to feel real. I pulled up in a black sedan, headlights glancing off the frost-covered windows, and for a moment I just sat there watching my breath fog the glass. Dad had called the week before, his voice tight with command disguised as affection. Family dinner. "Lauren, it's time." He didn't have to say more. I knew what time meant, time to perform. Inside, the air hummed with low laughter, the clink of silver against porcelain. My mother met me at the door with her usual glow. "Lauren, you look lovely, dear." "Thank you, Mom," I said, brushing snow from my coat. Ethan appeared next, perfectly pressed as always, the heir to our father's empire of control. "Well, look who's finally decided to show up," he said, smirking. "You've been working yourself into the ground, right? 18 hours a day and still no time for family." I smiled slowly. Some things take longer to pay off. The dining room hadn't changed. Same chandelier, same gold-rimmed china, same table long enough to seat 10, but intimate enough for humiliation. Dad lifted his glass. "To my family," he said. "To resilience and hard work. Some of us still remember what that means." The jab landed, but I didn't flinch. "Oh, I remember," I said softly. "You taught me well." Dinner began. Conversation flowed, familiar and shallow: stock shares, promotions, success stories, rehearsed to sound effortless. I chewed quietly, smiling when expected. I'd been doing it my whole life, playing invisible in rooms like this. Then Ethan leaned forward, grinning. "So, Lauren, what exactly is it you do again? You're still chasing that virtual thing, right?" "Still," I said, sipping my wine. "It's keeping me busy." He laughed. "Busy doesn't mean successful, sis. Some of us deal in real money, not digital dreams." Laughter rippled around the table. Dad joined in, eyes shining with pride at his son's cruelty. It was their favorite act, the golden boy and his echo. But something in me had shifted. I'd spent years letting their words wash over me. Tonight, I wanted them to feel the silence that follows the truth. The chandelier flickered, once the lights dimming just enough to change the air. I looked at Ethan and said, "You're right. You deal in real money. That's why I bought your firm's biggest client last week." The laughter stopped. Ethan blinked, unsure he'd heard right. "What Orion Data Systems?" I said calmly. "They were undervalued. We closed the acquisition Friday morning." Dad's hand tightened on his glass. "Lauren, what are you talking about?" "Lumiverse acquired Orion," I said evenly. "Which means your client is now one of my subsidiaries." The silence stretched thin as glass. Ethan's mouth opened then closed again. "That's impossible." "You're welcome to check," I said, setting down my fork. "Public filings went out this afternoon." Mom's hand trembled as she reached for her napkin. "Lauren, dear, you don't mean I do," I said. "Business is business, right?" Ethan's color drained. "You did this to embarrass me." I tilted my head. "No, I did it because it was smart. For years they'd turned me into a cautionary tale. Now I watched them unravel, their certainty collapsing beneath the weight of my calm." Dad finally spoke. "You've changed," he said quietly. I met his eyes. "No, Dad. You just never really looked." He stared at me, searching for the daughter he thought he'd shape, the one who'd keep her head down, apologize for taking up space. She was gone. Mom tried to recover the mood, her voice trembling. "Let's not do this. It's Christmas." "Exactly," I said, pushing my chair back. "A time for truth." The scrape of wood against marble echoed like thunder. I stood adjusting my jacket, the sound of my own heartbeat steady and strong. I used to think success was measured by what people like you approved of, I said. Now I know better. Success isn't applause. It's peaceful. Ethan sneered, the last shred of his pride snapping. You're unbelievable. I smiled. No, I'm undeniable. I left them there, a tableau of shock and silence, the glittering table suddenly too bright, too hollow. Outside snow fell heavier now, coating the world in white. My driver opened the door, the warmth of the car spilling out. As we pulled away, I glanced back once. Through the frosted window, I could still see the chandelier burning gold, a fragile glow above a family finally realizing that the daughter they dismissed had rewritten the story without them. For the first time, I didn't feel small leaving that house. I felt infinite. The phone buzzed in my hand, Caitlin's message lighting the screen. You're trending again. They reveal videos everywhere. I typed back, let them see. The car turned onto the empty road tires, whispering against snow. Somewhere behind me, their dinner carried on, but the balance had shifted forever. They'd spent years feeding on my silence. Tonight I let them choke on it. The night after Christmas, the city didn't sleep. Neither did I. My name was everywhere on screens and articles, whispered in conversations by people who'd never spoken my name with respect before. Lauren Brooks, self-made billionaire, founder of Lumiverse. It felt like someone else's life playing on loop. Caitlin texted just after midnight. You seeing this? They're calling you the quiet storm of tech. I smiled at the phrase. Quiet storm. That was exactly what I had become. I didn't reply right away. I just sat there watching the snow collect on the window ledge, the city glowing beneath it. For the first time, the noise outside matched the noise in my head, loud, but somehow peaceful. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Caitlin. It was an unknown number. Miss Brooks, a man's voice asked when I answered. Yes, this is Michael Reeves from Forbes Live. We're airing your profile tomorrow morning. I thought you might want to prepare. Prepare, I asked. You might say it's thorough. We received some quotes from your brother, your father colleagues from your early days. You've made quite an impression. My stomach tightened. Quotes, he hesitated. Some are flattering. Some less so. But it's compelling television. When the call ended, I sat in the dark for a long time. I knew what was coming. Ethan's bitterness, Dad's revisionist pride, Mom's fragile guilt. The world would finally see the parts of my story they'd spent years rewriting. At dawn, Caitlin arrived at my apartment with coffee. You ready? She asked, sliding onto the couch beside me. I don't think that word means what it used to, I said, managing a small smile. The screen flickered to life. The program began with drone footage of the city skyline, cold, bright, and different. Then my voice recorded months earlier. I built Lumiverse because I wanted people to feel again. For a while, it was just my story. The humble beginnings, the long nights, the failures, the triumphs, and then there they were. Dad seated in his office, his tie perfectly knotted. Lauren's always been ambitious, he said smoothly. Of course we worried she was chasing fantasies. But I suppose every family has one dreamer. Ethan's turn came next. His smirk didn't reach his eyes. I'm proud of her. I mean, sure, she kept secrets, but I guess some people like dramatic reveals. That's Lauren, always a flair for the unexpected. Mom looked softer, but her words cut deeper. She's always wanted to prove something. I just hope she can finally rest. The interviewer's voice overlaid their faces. For years, the Brooks family underestimated Lauren's work. Now they find themselves the subject of her greatest lesson, success without approval. Caitlin exhaled. They made it sound like you're punishing them. Maybe I am, I said quietly. But when the segment ended and my face filled the screen again, confident, unflinching, I didn't feel satisfied. I felt weight. Years of silence collapsing into one loud public reckoning. That evening, Dad called. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity won. Lauren, he began, his voice tight. That interview made us look terrible. I didn't edit it, I said. You could have stopped it. No, I said softly. You could have stopped it years ago. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, low and weary, he said, You've humiliated your family. I let out a breath. No, Dad. You did that yourselves. When I hung up, Caitlin was standing in the doorway. You okay? Define okay, I said, half smiling. She stepped closer. You won, Lauren. You proved them wrong. You built something out of nothing. Isn't that enough? It should be, I said, looking out at the city lights. But the thing about silence is, it echoes long after the noise fades. The next morning, I was supposed to be at the office, but instead I drove. No destination, just motion. The snow had stopped leaving the streets silver and clean. I passed the park where I used to sit after job interviews that went nowhere, the diner where Caitlin and I sketched Lumiverse on napkins, the bridge where I'd once promised myself I wouldn't give up. At a red light, I rolled down the window. Cold air rushed in, biting at my cheeks. For the first time in years, I felt something simple relief. I'd spent so long chasing validation, then revenge, and somewhere in between, I'd built an empire. But the empire wasn't what freed me. The silence was. The power to walk away from their voices, from their control, from needing them to see me. When I pulled over near the waterfront, the phone buzzed again. A message from Caitlin Press wants a statement. Everyone's asking how it feels to be the billionaire who beat her family. I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, Tell them I didn't beat anyone. I just stopped playing their game. The water shimmered in the early sun, still and endless. For once I didn't think about the next deal, the next headline, or the next confrontation. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who sat at that dinner table taking every insult, quietly collecting them like ammunition. She'd finally done what she promised. She made them listen. And now the silence belonged to me. The day after the Forbes live segment aired, my inbox filled with invitations, talk shows, tech panels, charity galas. Everyone wanted the girl who rose from family ridicule to billionaire status. The narrative wrote itself. I didn't need to speak anymore. The world had decided what I was. But beneath all that noise, one message stood out. It was from an old teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, my high school art mentor. Her words were simple. Proud of you, Lauren. You always built beauty from hurt. Don't forget the building part. It hit harder than I expected. I'd built empires from pain, yes. But had I built anything inside myself? Still, I had no time to dwell. Lumiverse was preparing to go public. The boardroom meetings were endless graphs, projections, lawyers speaking in numbers instead of words. Everyone was celebrating. Everyone except me. Caitlin noticed. You're quiet, she said one afternoon as we walked through the new San Francisco office. The glass walls gleamed, reflecting the skyline. You've done everything you said you would. You're free. So why do you look like you're standing in a cage? I stared at the city below, tiny and buzzing. Because cages don't always have bars, Caitlin. Sometimes they're made of gold. That night I received another message, this time from Mom. Your father wants to apologize. Dinner at home Sunday. Please come. My first instinct was to delete it, but I didn't. Maybe I wanted to see if he was capable of more than pride and regret. Maybe part of me still wanted to believe there was something human left in him. Sunday came gray and heavy, the sky swollen with clouds. I wore black, not out of mourning but precision. Every visit home felt like entering a boardroom where emotion was weakness. When I stepped inside, the scent of roast chicken and pine candles filled the air. The same old dining room waited, gleaming like a museum exhibit of our family's false perfection. Dad was already seated at the head of the table, posture-stiff glass of scotch untouched. Mom hovered near the sideboard, hands twisting a napkin. Ethan wasn't there, apparently busy with work. Lauren, Dad said, standing awkwardly. His voice was softer than I remembered. You look well. Thanks, I said, taking my seat. For a few moments, no one spoke. The clinking of utensils and the ticking of the wall clock were the only sounds. Finally, Dad exhaled. I owe you an apology. The words hung between us, foreign and fragile. I should have believed in you, he continued. I was too proud to admit when I was wrong. I nodded slowly. You were. He blinked, taken aback by my calm. I wanted what was best for you. No, I said quietly. You wanted what looked best for you. Mom's eyes shimmered. Lauren, please, I'm not angry, I said, my tone even. Not anymore. I just learned that love without respect is a contract I don't have to sign. Dad looked down, his jaw tightening. You think you're above us now? I leaned back. No, I just stopped trying to be beneath you. The silence that followed wasn't sharp this time, it was tired. For the first time, I saw my father not as the man who'd mocked me, but as someone trapped in the only story he knew how to tell. Mom broke the quiet. Your brother's been struggling since the news. He feels like he's lost his place. He didn't lose anything, I said. He just found out I had one too. Dad rubbed his temples. You don't understand, Lauren. You humiliated him. You humiliated all of us. I stared at him. No, I revealed you. There's a difference. He slammed his palm on the table. The sound made Mom flinch. Enough, he barked. You think money makes you better? I held his gaze. No. But it means I don't have to beg for your approval anymore. His anger faltered, replaced by something else, defeat. The old dominance in his posture slipped away. You've become cruel, he said softly. No, I whispered. I just stopped letting cruelty define me. The chandelier above flickered, catching the glint of his glass. For a moment, neither of us looked away. Then quietly I stood. I didn't come here to fight, I said. I came because you asked me to. You said you wanted to apologize. You did. Now you can decide what to do with that. Mom rose too, her voice shaking. Lauren, please don't leave angry. I'm not angry, I said again. I'm done. As I walked toward the door, Dad spoke one last time. You'll regret walking away from your family. I paused at the threshold. No, I said. I regret ever letting you define what family meant. The cold air hit me as I stepped outside, sharper than before, but it felt clean. I exhaled, watching my breath fade into the night. When I reached the car, Caitlin was waiting inside as promised. How'd it go? She asked. I smiled faintly. They tried to play the old game. I just didn't sit at the table. As we drove off, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, its windows glowing like the ghosts of my past. Lauren, Caitlin said after a while, when you first started Lumiverse, you said it was about connection. Do you still believe that I looked out at the dark skyline ahead? Yes, I said. But not all connections deserve to stay plugged in. She nodded quiet. The city rose in the distance, tall, bright, alive. My empire, my choice, my silence. Behind me, the Brooks name was still gold-plated and empty. Ahead, the future hummed like light. And for the first time, I didn't just feel free. I felt whole. The news cycle didn't stop for anyone, not even for redemption. A week after I left my parents' house, the story evolved again. The Brooks family rift. Deepen's one headline read, Another billionaire, Lauren Brooks cuts ties with her father's empire. I didn't issue a statement, didn't correct or confirm anything. The silence spoke louder. Inside Lumiverse headquarters, the energy was electric. Our IPO filing was scheduled for the following month, and the valuation numbers were staggering. The office buzzed with celebration champagne camera flashes, congratulatory handshakes. But I stood at the edge of the glass terrace overlooking the city, feeling both weightless and heavy. Caitlin approached quietly. You should be proud, she said. We did it. I nodded. We did. She hesitated, searching my face. You don't look happy. Because winning doesn't feel like what I thought it would, I admitted. It's loud. But it's not peaceful. Before she could answer, my assistant appeared in the doorway. Lauren, there's a call for you, from Mr. Reeves. He says it's urgent. I followed her back inside, my heels clicking against the marble. Michael Reeves from Forbes Live again, the same journalist who had produced the viral interview. "Lauren," he said when I picked up his voice, careful. "There's something you should know before it hits the press. Your brother's company, Ethan Brooks Capital, filed for bankruptcy this morning." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Bankruptcy? Yes. Apparently his investors pulled out. The timing, well, you can imagine the headlines. I closed my eyes. I didn't imagine the headlines. I saw the dining room instead, Ethan leaning back laughing, telling me I'd never make it. Dad smiled beside him, proud of his heir. And now it was all collapsing. When the call ended, Caitlin was waiting. "What happened, Ethan's company?" I said softly. "It's gone." Her eyes widened. "Lauren, people are going to say you had something to do with it." I looked out the window, the skyline sharp and cold. Let them. But that night I couldn't sleep. The victory felt hollow. I'd spent years dreaming of this the day the tables turned, the moment the ones who mocked me finally fell silent. But watching it happen in real time didn't bring satisfaction. It brought a strange ache. The next morning, Mom called. I didn't answer. Then she texted, "He's lost everything. Please, Lauren, talk to him." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. He never wanted to talk to me when I had nothing. Still, guilt is a persistent thing. It doesn't vanish with wealth. That afternoon, I drove back to the old neighborhood just to see it. Ethan's house stood at the end of the street. Modern, glassy, soulless. Through the window I saw him sitting in the dark, a whiskey glass in hand, face buried in his palms. For a long moment I stayed in the car. Then I got out. He didn't notice when I walked in. The door was unlocked. "Ethan," I said softly. He lifted his head. His eyes were bloodshot. "Come to gloat." "No," I said. "I came because Mom asked me to." He laughed bitterly. "Of course she did. Mom sends the savior." I ignored the jab. "You'll be fine. You always land on your feet." "Not this time," he muttered. "Investors are gone. Dad's furious. And you? You're the golden one now." The irony's poetic, isn't it? I took a breath. "I didn't want this for you." He scoffed. "Didn't you? You built your success on proving us wrong." "I built it despite you," I said, voice steady. "There's a difference." He looked away. "You think this makes you better?" "No. It makes me free." The silence that followed was the same kind that used to hang between us as kids when he'd get praised and I'd get ignored. It was full of everything we never said. Then his voice cracked. "Dad's talking about selling the house." I hesitated. "He'll survive. He always does." He looked at me, then really looked for the first time in years. "You're enjoying this," he whispered. "No," I said quietly, the word filled with a quiet finality. "I'm remembering it. I'm remembering how it felt to have nothing to be told I was nothing, and now I see that his humiliation doesn't erase my past pain. His fall doesn't make me any happier. It just makes me realize how pointless this fight has been all along." I left before he could say anything else. Back at the office, Caitlin met me in the lobby. "Reporters are circling the bankruptcy story," she said. "They're tying it to you," I shrugged. "They'll write what they want. Maybe issue a statement." I shook my head. "No. Some stories don't need my voice. Just the truth." That evening I went to the rooftop alone. The city stretched below me, glittering and endless. The cold bit at my fingers, but I stayed. Everything I'd built, every sleepless night, every insult turned into fuel had led to this view. But the higher I rose, the more the air thinned. I realized then that success had a cost, and mine had been silence, not theirs, but my own. I'd built walls so high no one could hurt me, but also no one could reach me. The phone buzzed again, another headline alert. "Brooks family split deepens as Lauren refuses to comment." I put it face down on the ledge. The wind howled around me, fierce and clean. For the first time, I let myself breathe without thinking of who was watching. The tables had turned. The story had reversed. But the reckoning wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. The morning after the IPO, the world looked brighter, but I couldn't tell if it was joy or exhaustion. The numbers were staggering. Lumiverse opened at nearly double its projected share value. Reporters called it a historic debut, a victory for women in tech, a symbol of perseverance. My phone was vibrating nonstop with notifications, congratulations, invitations, praise from people who once avoided my name. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt quiet. In the conference room, champagne flowed, laughter filled the air, and camera shutters clicked like applause. My team toasted, Caitlin hugged me, tears in her eyes. "We did it, Lauren. You're officially the youngest self-made billionaire in the country." I smiled, but it felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "Take a picture," someone called. Flashbulbs popped. The light hurt my eyes. Later, when the crowd thinned and the noise faded, I slipped out to the balcony overlooking the city. The wind carried the scent of salt from the bay, sharp and alive. For the first time in years, there was no fight left to win. Caitlin joined me quietly. "You disappeared," she said. "I needed air. You should be celebrating." "I will, just not like this." She studied me for a moment, then smiled softly. "So what now?" "I'm not sure," I said honestly. "Maybe I will start building something that doesn't need to hurt to exist." She nodded. "That sounds like peace." That night, alone in my quiet apartment, I pulled out my old journal. The pages were filled with my family's words, a chronicle of every insult and dismissal. I read them all, not with anger, but with a strange detachment. I was no longer that girl. The revenge I had sought wasn't what truly brought me here. It was work, the silent hours, the failures I turned into lessons, the joy of creating. I realized then that success had a cost, and mine had been silence, not theirs but my own. I had built walls so high no one could hurt me, but also no one could reach me. The tables had turned, but the victory felt hollow because it was built on bitterness. The next morning, my phone was full of messages, investors, journalists, strangers calling me an inspiration. But one message made me pause. It was from Rachel, my cousin, the only one who ever defended me at those dinners. "Proud of you, Lauren. You didn't just prove them wrong. You proved it's possible." I typed back, "Thank you. You were right, they did regret it." Before I could put the phone down, another message came through. From Mom. "Your father's in the hospital. Heart episode. He wants to see you." For a moment I didn't move. The words blurred. It wasn't anger I felt. It wasn't even fear. It was a strange sense of finality. The war I had been fighting was over. I found myself driving before I'd really decided to. The hospital stood sterile and cold, all glass and white walls. When I walked into his room, the steady beep of the heart monitor filled the silence. Mom sat at his bedside, her eyes swollen. She looked up startled, as if she hadn't expected me to come. "Lauren," she whispered, "he's been asking for you." Dad's voice came weak, unfamiliar. "Lauren, you came." I stood at the foot of his bed. I did. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The machines filled the air between us with their slow rhythm. Finally, he said, "You were right. About everything." "I didn't want to be right," I said quietly. He gave a tired smile. "I was proud. I just didn't know how to say it without losing something of myself." "Your pride," I said. He nodded, eyes closing briefly. "You remind me of your mother. You both build walls when you're hurt." Mom looked down, tears rolling silently. I stepped closer. "I built walls to survive," I said, "not to win." He turned his head toward me. "Did you?" The question hung heavy. After a moment, I said, "I think I survived long enough to finally live." He reached for my hand, a gesture I hadn't seen since I was a child. His grip was weak but real. "Don't let success make you lonely," he said. "Family isn't just who raised you. It's who stands with you when the noise fades." I squeezed his hand once, then let go. "I'll remember that." That evening, when I left the hospital, the sky had turned deep orange, the last sunlight glinting off the bay. The city stretched before me, restless and alive, just like I'd always dreamed. Caitlin called as I reached the car. How was it? Strange, I said. He apologized. I think he meant it. She was quiet for a moment. You okay? I looked out at the skyline, 1,000 windows flickering like stars. I think so. For the first time, I don't need their approval to feel whole. I just need to keep building something that matters. As I hung up, I thought about the dinner table, all those years of silence, of mockery, of trying to make myself small enough to fit their version of love. I thought about the night Ethan's friend asked, "Is your sister really Forbes' self-made billionaire?" and how the entire room fell silent. That silence had once felt like victory. Now it just felt like peace. I started the car. The radio was playing softly, a love song I didn't recognize. The city lights blurred through the windshield as I drove. Somewhere behind me, the story of the Brooks family was ending. Ahead, something new was waiting, undefined, unburdened mine. At a red light, I smiled to myself. The world would keep talking about revenge, success, inheritance, betrayal, karma, even shares and stock prices. They'd write their headlines and spin their stories. But I knew the truth. The real revenge was never wealth. It was self-respect. And as the light turned green, I whispered the only words that felt true: I forgive you. The car rolled forward into the quiet dawn, the city opening wide ahead of me, endless, forgiving, alive.